Before you kill me, understand this. I'm not saying that active recall is bad, but focus on the word for a second. It's active recall. And what exactly do you recall? Something that you have already learned. If I want to recall how exactly the kidneys function or how the laws of motion work, then I need to firstly learn that knowledge, right? I need to acquire that knowledge. So how do you really learn something the first time you encounter it? And that is the biggest problem with active recall. And this is where the SQ3R method comes in. What's cooking, sapiens? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Arham and I'm a final year MBBS student at the University of Oslo in Norway, currently on a gap semester. The SQ3R method is the prerequisite to active recall and stands for survey, question, read, recite, and review. Let's dive into the first part, which is S for survey. And this is where you basically warm up your mind before you actually start learning the course material. What annoys me the most is that we humans treat our brains in a completely different manner compared to the way we treat the rest of our bodies, especially, for example, our muscles. So the example I always like to give to my students or to other people is that, let's say I have to train my chest today. It's chest day. So I go to the gym, right? Now, what would be the right approach? That I immediately start bench pressing 200 pounds, or should I first warm up my rotator cuffs, my shoulders, warm my triceps up, do some push-ups, and then gradually increase the bench press, the weight to 200 pounds? Obviously the latter, right? But when it comes to learning, we somehow expect to just open a book and expect our brains, our mind to start absolutely digesting everything and absorbing all the information that we are giving to it without actually warming the mind first. And this is a major problem that we need to solve by surveying before we actually start learning the material. So in every chapter we have titles, we have introductions, we have illustrations with graphics and diagrams, we have bolds, italics, we have headings, subheadings, and all that stuff. So go through these before you actually start reading the text itself. And this is very important because it helps us to create this mental model which allows us to understand how the entire chapter, how the topic is really organized, right? And in this way, we do not lose the forest from the trees. And this basically also serves as a very good warm-up for your brain before you actually start learning. Let's get to the second point, which is actually question. And this is the part which you will actually using for active recall later as well. So what you are doing here is that you are preparing for your active recall by making a question bank before you actually start reading the whole chapter. So while you are surveying, right, when you go through those headings, those subheadings, graphics, information boxes, the summary at the end of the chapter, start writing questions from those, right? Prepare your mind into understanding what the topic is going to be about by making these questions. And hence, this way you can come back to these questions later on while you are doing active recall. And secondly, the benefit with this is that once you have made these questions, right, and then you start reading the chapter, then your mind automatically knows what was important versus what was not important and what you need to actually really focus on, because your mind knows that, okay, I wrote a question about this one thing, and hence when I encounter this while reading, I need to really focus and really need to put my brain into the high gear. The next part is basically where you start reading the chapter, right? Read the text, read the course material, and try to understand what's going on. And here is the trick. So we have to break down the reading part into smaller chunks. Now imagine shoving a whole naan into your mouth and trying to digest that. That won't really happen. You will just puke, right? But if you break that naan into smaller pieces and then get some curry and get some salad and get some raita, some yogurt, and then put that into your mouth and really enjoy the meal, that's going to be, first of all, much more enjoyable, and secondly, much more easier on your tummy as well to digest that material. The same applies for our brains as well. If you break down the information into smaller chunks, it's going to be much more readily absorbed into your mental memory or into your system. Now you decide exactly how you want to divide the reading part, but I personally like to divide it into subsections, which the book has already done for me. So I read one subsection and then I stop over there and move on to the next part, which is recite. Now this is very simple. So you basically stop after reading a certain subsection and then recite what you have already learned and really try to break it down into simpler terms using the Feynman technique, aka try to explain that to a 5-year-old. Now obviously a 5-year-old would not understand anything about neuroanatomy or cell biology, but the point is that you have to try and simplify what you have learned or what the book says into firstly own words and secondly simple words. The last part of the SQ3R method is the review part, where you just stop after you have read the whole chapter, right? And then you go through the question bank that you have already prepared and start answering those questions with your memory to really test if you have actually understood what the entire chapter was about. And this is basically your first active recall. You have learned the material, right? And now it's your time to sit down and go through that question bank and see if you have actually understood everything. That's a wrap for today's Sapiens. Now I highly recommend you check out this video, which will also surely bring you some value. And before you leave, kiss that subscribe button. I'll see you guys on the other side. Take care. Peace.